your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we've discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great Lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
and
Lynn Raia.
And today we're going to be discussing a custom and a devotion called veiling. Before we go any further, I just want everyone to know that it's not a thing that we're required to do as Dominicans.
or Catholics.
Or Catholics, right? It is anymore. I want to clarify that because for 2,000 years, approximately it was, the last 40 years, it hasn't been. So just to clarify that.
And we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, well, we're going to go into a lot of reasons why we do it. I think one reason, Lynn, you've talked about this before, and we know that we both struggled with deciding to do this because we've discussed it. And I think there's some people out there that look at us and wonder, why we're doing that and just don't want to ask. So we're going to discuss it and share it just because it's become something important to both of us.
Yes, it has.
Well, what is veiling? For those people who don't know or have any clue and are just turning in, what is veiling?
Good question.
I think most people here have seen the veil being worn at Mass, and this is just usually a beautiful lace type veil. It can be a lot of other options, right, Lynn? You were saying, someone that has a hat.
Right, she wears pretty hats.
And it's just we're going to go into a lot of the symbolism, but it's something that when we enter a church, some people do it. I think for me, it's when I am going to participate in Mass and receive our Lord in Holy Eucharist. Mm-hmm. And that might be different for you, Lynn. Do you wear one when you go to adoration too?
Not always, but I'm trying to train myself to do that because I feel like I should.
Okay. So see, that's one thing. I know some women who wear their veil always, and it's all different. We all can express that devotion in a different way. But what are some reasons why you decided to?
Well, I saw some ladies. My grandmother used to veil, not so much when I was older, but when I saw, pictures of her when I was a little child, her veiling. And it just was beautiful to me on the people that wore it where it matched their clothes. They wore it well. Right. Fashionably well. So I just thought it was beautiful, and it just was tugging my heart that, what is this about? And when I began to dig into it, it was really appealing to me. But I struggled for a while to actually orchestrate that.
I wonder if people out there know, I'm sure they do, because there's a struggle when you do something that might make you stand out or be different. You wonder what people are thinking, and then suddenly you realize, or somebody like your husband told you, it's the fear of the Lord. If you feel called to do it. I love the saying, if you fear God, you'll fear no one.
That's right.
And that's how we should be. And this is simply a devotional. Nobody should look down upon it as anything that is overly reverent, and how can you love Jesus too much? So this is just another way to show that we love Jesus. Do you have any thoughts about maybe some of the background of why women maybe didn't veil at some point?
In our lifetime, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there was a struggle. I know there's in the 60s, of course, we know some of the feminism came about, and the change in the Vatican canonical law and codes. And so there's still a struggle today on whether or not we're obligated, and is it optional? And so there are some people that say it's not, still to this day. So I think it began then, and with the misnomer, the wrong perception, for lack of better words, of what veiling is.
So one thing that I thought of, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this, is take a look when you walk into a church. What is veiled? The very first thing you see is the altar that has a veil. I mean, this is the place where the sacrifice of the Mass is going to occur. It's a mystery. Mm-hmm. It wants to be revealed, in some way, and so we put a veil on it.
And even though there may be some beautiful artwork, woodwork as part of the altar, it's veiled.
It is.
And of course, every altar has relics of saints. Those are covered. I mean, because you have the holy sacrificial altar right before you. And then what are some of the other things that you see that are veiled as well?
Right, the tabernacle, where Jesus is there, body, blood, soul, and divinity, his Eucharistic presence, which, I mean, you might realize these things that are veiled in the church aren't because they're inferior. It's actually because they're so beautiful,
Sacred.
glorious,
Yeah.
sacred, that the mystery needs to be, given some sort of a veil.
Right, and I know that we're told that our eyes are veiled while we're here on earth. We don't see in fullness right now. We only see in part. And we're still sinful creatures. And so I truly believe that the veil helps to keep things from being profaned. I believe that is part of God's purpose in veiling those sacred items, so that people that don't know what they're looking at, God reveals himself in pieces, parts to us, a little at a time. The closer we get to him, the more he reveals to us, and the more the veil comes down, the more it comes off. And in marriages, it's that way, and between a husband and a wife, and those even in just friendships.
I think we could almost stop the show at we veil mysteries, and so women are veiled.
There we go. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
So true.
But it is true,
Every
because
man.
you walk in church, and of course veiling means something that is hidden, and it's a mystery or beauty that is hidden. So of course the tabernacle itself, hides the Blessed Sacrament, but you do have that cloth, that veil inside the tabernacle that maybe some people don't see or have never seen before, never knew it was there. Maybe some churches it's not there, but it should be. And the priest removes parts that veil, genuflects, and then takes out the Blessed Sacrament. And so that's just something that I think people need to have a better awareness of, that in church the sacred items are veiled. And I think Lynn, you had mentioned also during benediction, when the priest veils his hands, covers his hands, when giving the benediction with the Blessed Sacrament, during adoration, because it's holy,
Right.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think people need to kind of get more comfortable with that. And I will say, I think the younger people are becoming more comfortable, or I'll just say,
Drawn to
are
it.
more comfortable than the older folks.
Right.
Older folks, I don't know, 40,
Us.
50, 60s. Yeah, that would be us. Because, I tell you one thing, you go into Our Lady of Wisdom Church, especially at any Mass, but especially a weekday Mass. And I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I tell my son, I said, if you're looking for a spouse, you go to Saturday morning or weekday Mass over to Our Lady of Wisdom, and almost every female, young, middle-aged, old, are veiled.
Yes.
It is a beautiful sight.
It
Just
is.
From the back and looking forward, you see all the beauty and mystery, not only on the altar but within the church, veiled.
And I think that feminine solidarity is
Oh,
a
yes.
power,
It
right?
is.
Very much
Yeah.
so.
It
Yeah.
is.
Very much so.
So I'm going to tell quickly why I veil, because I went back and forth through a lot of things, and I'm a convert. When I was reading in the Bible, studying St. Paul, and I thought, why don't we do this? And so I tried. I had little ones that would pull on my veil. I didn't have positive responses from some people. So over the years, I just kept going back and forth. So finally, I was at a cathedral here at St. John Cathedral in Lafayette, probably about 6 years ago. I went to confession, came out in front of the tabernacle and was doing my penance. And when the priest came in and he genuflected as he went past the tabernacle to go to begin Mass, I turned right away and I grabbed my veil out of my purse. I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, wow, okay, I haven't done that for a while. So I put my veil on. I said, okay, Lord, just tell me why. Why did I want to do that?
Yeah.
The reading that day, and I'm not kidding, I don't have it in front of me, it's just, and so this is my little, it's not verbatim, but the reading that day was about Rebecca and Isaac, and Rebecca was being brought back to her, to be married to Isaac, and she gets out of her carriage and asks the person driving, the driver, like, who is that? And he said, that's Isaac. That's the one you will be joined to and betrothed to. And she turned and she grabbed her veil. And I thought, I got it. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my veil. I know that we're going to be united here in Holy Communion. It'll be the, receiving our Lord.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, now I know why I have that desire. And it's also that symbolism of Christ being our bridegroom and, in a marriage.
Right. Because you can translate your experience with, you want to honor God. You got this notion in your heart, in your conscience that you needed to put it on. But we can often say, well, why don't men have that same tug? Why men also see Christ on the altar. They also see the veiled tabernacle. They see the same things that we see when they walk into Mass. Why are they not called to veil and we are? What's the difference? Why is it the women? And so that brings up whole new questions, and people tend to, as Jeff was saying earlier, when you see these things, there's some truths. The Catholic Church holds these truths, that we have certain these sacred items, and we can tend to be a little rebellious in our hearts and say, well, I don't think that it should be only the priest touching the monstrance. But there's a reason for that, and there's a reason that we do these things, and our hearts tell us God said he wrote his laws on our hearts and minds. And when we feel that, it's him telling us these things, but there are reasons why he tells the women. And I think that's a really unique thing that we could get to.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on this. I do. So as you do things, of course, there's private sort of meditation and thought. And over time, I've given a lot of thought to the idea that, and especially for people who feel that this is an inferior thing, this might be a little bit different to hear, because I think in the Catholic Church, they hold women in high regard.
Yes.
Mary is the greatest creation. We've already discussed that before, and she's a woman.
Right.
How is that an inferior position? It's not. Also, when you said that, Lynn, we were talking about why do women have this feeling or desire. I feel like when Eve was the one who wanted most to be like God. I mean, she's the one that went to Satan. Mm-hmm. She's the one that met Satan and said, and got into this discussion. Yes, he kind of tricked her a little bit, but it was her that she wanted to be the highest. And she was the last creature to be made in the order of creation. And so there she is, wanting to be like God. And that in our intellect, where we are made most like God, seems to be where she met, Satan.
Right.
So that is what we cover, and we want to, and perhaps there's something there. I don't know what it is.
I just love that. To me, I love this analogy.
And so one of the things that I think is extremely interesting is that, people, sort of put tradition, especially in this modern time, they put tradition on a side table and try to forget it or just take it out when company comes over. But if you look at tradition, I would venture to say maybe 80% of all women who have been got married in the last 20, 30, 40 years, probably veiled at least once in their life.
Right.
And that's when they were walking down the aisle.
Exactly.
And what I find interesting is that that's okay. Mm-hmm. But yet when we are going to Mass and in front of the Blessed Sacrament, people think that that's uncomfortable or that's not appropriate. But it's so interesting, and you look at 2,000 years of tradition in the Catholic Church where women veiled. and whether it's white, whether it's black. I mean, it's just very interesting. So, in the Code of Canon Law, 1917, and it goes back to the second pope and about the importance of veiling. But, the Code of Canon Law, 1917, had the rubrics for that, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Then in 1983, the new canon law code came out, and it didn't make any mention of veiling. And then people say, well, it was clear that, who was Pope during that time? Well, it was very clear that Pope John Paul II, didn't feel that it was appropriate for women to be veiling. Well, what's interesting is that whenever the state visit would happen at the Vatican, of course, to the Holy See, which is a foreign entity, is the state of the Vatican. And so whenever there would be foreign dignitaries that would come on official visits to meet with the Pope, any women that were with them were required by the Pope to wear a black veil.
And they are still required by the Pope to wear a veil.
It has been required that, especially in a state visit, that women just wear black veils, and so it's not only just rooted in tradition, but it's rooted in respect and dignity.
Right, and not because women are, like Cheryl said, inferior, but if we go back to the book of Numbers and look at how God told Moses he wanted the Holy of Holy items to be handled when they would pick up the tabernacle and they would move. The whole nation of Israel would move and they would bring, the tent with them. And Moses only and his sons, only the Levite priest, were allowed to touch anything holy, and it had to be covered. Everything had to be covered. The ark itself had to be covered with leather to protect it, but also a blue cloth, which is very interesting to me. There's so many nuances in the Bible. I just love it. And I'm a revert to the Catholic faith, so discovering these things my whole head just explodes. So blue is a sign of royalty. We know that. And Mother Mary, a lot of her apparitions, she's in blue, has a blue sash or a blue veil, and all of her apparitions she's veiled. And like you said, she's the highest creature that God created, Queen of the Angels. And so the ark, the old ark that God was in of the old law, and the new ark of the covenant, Mary, that carried Jesus, they're both veiled in the same manner. They're both sacred, and they're only allowed to be handled by these ordained priests. So they're very, very, very special, very sacred, and these similarities can't be ignored. He specifically told them these things to do, and it seems boring when you read it, but then when you make the correlation with Mary, it becomes amazing. It just lights up, and things, your eyes begin to open, and you begin to see things like, okay, like you said, you go into the church, like Jeff said, and first you see the altar veiled. You see the tabernacle itself is a veil, and it's made of certain metals. You don't just put an aluminum magnolite pot up there and put Jesus in it. It's right. It's brass or bronze or something. So the chalice. And
the ark was made of a special wood.
That's right.
That
acacia wood, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a wood that is, it's immaculate. I mean,
it doesn't rot.
It doesn't rot.
Exactly.
So,
yes, and you see all these things, these beautiful items that are veiled, and they're veiled with white. The linens, when they're there, they're white. And so a man who goes in, who represents the bridegroom, and he walks into the church and he represents Christ, and we're like the bride of Christ, the church. We represent the church as women. We go in, and the man sees these holy items, these beautiful veiled items that represent Christ. And when he looks at those, and then looks at his wife sitting next to him with a veil on, those two things should, in his mind,
connect.
Exactly. They should connect.
And if they don't, then it's your job to remind them.
Right? That's right. But the Bible itself tells
humbly.
us.
That's right. Humbly reminded. You are listening. Humbly. You're listening to Christ our King Catholic Radio, 90.5 FM, 99.5 FM. We are your lay Dominicans here based out of Lafayette, Louisiana. I want to thank Stein Lumber for their support. So we are talking about veiling at Mass, and what these beautiful ladies here with me here in the studio, what they do and their perspective on it. And we were just talking about the perceptions of veiling, and women who are the only creatures who are able to bring life forth. And that's something that is just not only mysterious, but so absolutely beautiful and mystical. And having women veil, I think, is so extremely not only attractive, but it's mysterious. And when we go into, and we forget, even if you go to Mass every day, we get into routine and we think about it, but this is where time and eternity meet. And there's a holy sacrifice being done in that church, on that altar. And we have to prepare ourselves and be in the right posture. If we want to talk about Dominicans, talk about St. Dominic and his postures. This really fits very nicely into on how we worship our Lord.
Mm-hmm. We want it to look different in there, right? This is a very special place when we're going to Mass, and I don't want it to feel like I'm at McDonald's or something.
Right. I agree. That it needs to be. It's supposed to look different from the world. We're supposed to be separate. We're supposed to be more. I wouldn't say superior would come to some people's minds.
Dignified.
Dignified. That's a good word. That we think that we're above people, but this nuance of relationship between us and God and us with each other is displayed for all to see in physical signs. We're not just witnessing something spiritual only. We're composite individuals. We're the only thing on earth that's made, not even the angels, of a physical body and a spirit.
Right.
And so God involves our physical items in our everyday world. Obviously, the bread and the wine, his blood and his body that he gives us in those two physical items, the work of human hands. So he involves everything spiritual for us with our bodies and our senses. We have the incense, and we have statues, and we have icons to look at, and there's so many things that involve our senses in the Catholic Church, and that is on purpose. We want to stay holy, and we cannot keep our senses, compartmentalize those senses off to the side, and I'm only going to be spiritually, involved when I'm in the church, but then my senses are left off to the side. God involves our whole person, and the veil, to me, is another involvement of our relationship. It's a physical sign, like a sacramental. Like you said, it's a devotional.
Right.
It's a physical sign of something that's happening spiritually, that we're acknowledging spiritually. Like I said earlier, when the man sees those items veiled and then looks at his veiled wife, and he is supposed to die for the church, his wife, like Christ died for the church. There's that relationship, that dynamic part of a relationship between a husband and a wife. And then we are like the church. We nurture the little ones. We grow them up. We have them as babies. They're baptized, and we take care of them. And we're the church. And we do the same thing that the church does for a new Christian. You come in as a baby, and you're baptized, and you grow up in the church, and you become catechized, you become formed, you have confirmation, and you begin to go from milk to meat. And it's the same relationship. And to me, the veil is just another symbol of that nuance, that relationship, that mystery of what's happening spiritually to us.
So, Lynn, you mentioned angels, and so folks might be wondering, well, what does the Bible say about veiling? Well, go to 1 Corinthians, and you can go to chapter 11, and there are several paragraphs in there that talks about head coverings and what's appropriate. I'm not going to read it, but I encourage all of you to go get your Bible, open up to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. But what is interesting, and this has always intrigued, I think, a lot of folks when they're reading about the head covering in the Bible, where it talks about, that is why a woman ought to have a veil on her head because of the angels. Now, there's been lots of discussion on, well, what does that really mean? So we're going to throw St. Thomas in here because since we're Dominicans, but at Mass, St. Thomas has written that during the Sanctus, during the Holy Holy, the angels are directly above the altar during this very time.
Right.
And they are, because, holy, holy, holy Lord, God of power and might, heaven and earth are full of your glory. It's in the Te Deum. And so it's one of the highest points of the Mass. And so the angels are present at that time. Now, I don't know if that's what St. Paul was talking about, but, a lot of the theologians, especially our St. Thomas, firmly believes that. But also, in antiquity, the priests and bishops were sometimes referred to as angels because, of course, like we talked about, time and eternity meet, and it's only the priest, the bishop, who is able to bring heaven down to earth for us.
That's a good
so
point.
that's just a little color commentary on that, because head coverings and veilings is really something that I think should be discussed a whole lot more, and we should embrace. It's just another sacramental in the Catholic Church to love.
That takes me to one thing that I think we talk about it as a devotional. Whenever we use a devotional, we also usually have a prayer with it. So something I've gotten into the habit of is praying the same prayer when I put my veil on. And it's I'm not going to remember verse from Deuteronomy. I say it in Hebrew because I think our Blessed Mother would have prayed. I know she would have prayed it. It's called the Shema. But it's, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And so when I put my veil on, I pray that in Hebrew. And then it's just, again, to emphasize that it is a devotional. And so it brings me to a point of prayer where I bring my focus in to why I'm here.
That's really good.
Now, I don't shop for veils very often, but for those individuals who are out there, and sometimes they're called chapel veils, sometimes they're called mantillas. Since you all are the experts on this, where have you gotten your veils, and where can our listeners get some for themselves?
Yeah.
I'd encourage people just to look around. I mean, I think there's some right here at our Catholic bookstores. But you can also, I've gotten some of mine from Veils by Lily. I don't know. I think people recognize that.
Not a sponsor.
No, but you asked me where I got it. So, and we discussed the coloring. I think at the end here we should just say it doesn't matter anymore.
No.
You can wear colors. There are places like the Vatican that require a black veil. I know we're part of the Equestrian Order of Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. We're required to wear a black veil.
Yeah.
But most of the time, just wearing a veil at Mass, white, black, blue, whatever color. I've seen
Matches
multicolors.
your clothes,
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay. I mean, if you choose to wear a veil, you can choose other colors of that.
Yeah, I like to do mine according to whatever season, if I can. Like
that's
Pentecost, I'll wear a red one, and during Advent, I wear my purple veil.
I'm pretty noticeable in my gray veil that I never, ever change. I'm not very creative. It's, my wardrobe's usually black and white, and my hair's got a little silver in it, unfortunately, now. So it matches my hair and usually comes somewhere in the range of my black and white Dominican clothing.
Yeah, and I'm a reader, too, so I tend to want to try to match a little bit so I don't detract from the Mass,
Well, and we've gotten into some of the little parts of it. I hope everybody understands more the really deep portion, the mystery and the beauty of wearing a veil. So we'll see you next week. God bless.
Passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past. I stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last.